How are you? This is Susan. Thank you. How are you? Oh, I've been talking about Thursday. He's going to be late.
Good evening and thank you for joining us for this summer series here at St. Thomas Anglican Parish. We are thrilled and humbled this evening to have our speaker, who taught at Northwest Catholic for how many years, Father? 700 years. He was pastor here, so I live with this man's legacy every day, and I'm very grateful to Almighty God and St. Thomas and St. Timothy for what we've done. He's now presently serving at Teresa of Calcutta. He taught French, he taught ethics, he's very ethical, and his taste is like a peak. So without further ado, welcome back.
Nice to see you again. Good to see you. I was very fascinated by this book that I am speaking to you about. But before we begin, I want to make sure that everyone has a copy of the quotes, because those are important.
Did you get me one?
It's entitled The Genius of Jesus, the Man Who Changed Everything. Chapter 4, The Genius of Power. And so I hope you have that with you because I'll be making reference to it. So, let me tell you a little bit about the book. All right? It's entitled, as I said to you, The Genius of Jesus. It's about very fascinating topic, the genius of Jesus. And it's written by a man by the name of Erwin Raphael McManus. Now, McManus has made it's his life goal to study genius and the pursuit of God. He is and has been described as a pastor, an author, and a public speaker. He did his undergraduate work in psychology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He received his Master of Divinity from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he received a Doctorate of Humane Letters from Southeastern University, Lakeland, Florida. McManus, as I said to you, is studying genius. This is not a theology book. It is not a scripture book. He is not a theologian, and he is not a scripture scholar, but he is a student of human life, which makes this book, I think, fascinating. He makes it very clear at the beginning of this book. I believe strongly in the divinity of Jesus Christ. But then he takes it from that point and studies the nuances and the words of the man Jesus, whom he claimed changed everything. Jesus revolutionized, he will say, how we look at power, which is our topic tonight, as well as beauty and truth. Now, before I begin with this short, brief lecture, when I mention the word genius to you, whose names come to your mind? Think about this. When you hear the word genius, whose name comes to your mind? Yes, absolutely. What Erwin did, what Raphael did, he took this summary. Now, as I read this to you, notice whose name is not on this list. Those people people who tended to following as geniuses. Leonardo da Vinci, number 1. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Ludwig van Beethoven, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, Stephen Hawking, Orson Welles, Alfred Hitchcock, Bobby Fischer, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Copernicus, and Galileo. Is there a name missing here? What is that name? Isn't it interesting that when we think of the word genius, the name Jesus Christ does not come to our minds? And I wonder, why is that? Why isn't Jesus on that list of geniuses? And that's where we're going tonight. We're going to look specifically at how Christ Jesus saw power. I did this deliberately. And we're going to look at what the implications of that could be for how we live today. But first, let me read to you how McManus defines genius. He begins by saying, "The genius does not always have the highest IQ, the best education, or even the most comprehensive knowledge of the field. The mark of a true genius is that the impossible becomes possible, the unknowable becomes knowable, and the invisible becomes visible." One last quote and how he's defining genius. Jesus saw a new way to be human, a way to live each moment fully present and fully alive. The genius of Jesus is that he teaches us how to become human again. You might want to look at this book. It's a very fascinating book. Of course, there's more to this definition of genius, but I wanted to give you this up front. Now, the issue of power. How was Jesus Christ a powerful person? How do we define that? So now, you know, a picture is worth, what they say, 1,000 words. And how many of you have been watching or have watched The Chosen? I highly recommend it. Now, the scene that you're about to view is in episode 1. And it's how this is the first time in the episode that you actually see Jesus Christ. And it's the healing of Mary Magdalene. And what I find so fascinating about this is not that she's portrayed as the prostitute, wrongly so throughout history, but as a woman who was deeply troubled and, in the scripture language, possessed of demons. Notice how Jesus uses his power to bring about her conversion. It is a powerful scene.
The sound for this particular clip may be a little bit fuzzy. I just want to alert you that the music has a tone to it that almost sounds like microphone feedback. It is, in fact, music meant to create an emotion, which it does.
sorry, Lilith.
Listen. Is she talking? Oh, what, huh? It's going to scratch me too.
Come on, not now.
So she...
Not now.
Alright, she smells anyway.
I don't know what else I can do to help you.
Give me that. Lots of it.
That's not going to solve your problems. It's meant to distract from
No
them.
more preaching. Just give it to me.
Lilith, please listen to what I'm saying.
Sit with him.
That's not real. Don't touch me. Lily. Lily, are you okay?
I have to go. Please forgive me. Leave me alone. Mary.
Mary of Magdala.
Lord, how do you know my name?
Thus says the Lord who created you, and he who formed you. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. The best one.
Very powerful scene, don't you think so? How did you see the power of Jesus being portrayed here? First of all, a word about this series, The Chosen. There's a group of people from various religious backgrounds, both Protestant and Catholic, who discuss every single scene. So it's not coming from just one perspective. But how did you see the power of Jesus in this film? And did you ever think that that's how she was cured?
Love. The show of love.
Gentleness. What changed her? What did he say? And she dropped the glass of wine. I called you by name. Do you remember when that will happen again 3 years later in a garden? Do you recall that scene? Can you tell me a little bit about it? you recall. It's Easter Sunday. He's risen from the tomb. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb. She does not see him. She's convinced they've stolen his body. But then, what happens? He appears to her. And she thought that he was the gardener. What did he say that changed everything for her? Her name. Her name. Mary. So that relationship between Jesus and those around him, that's wherein the true power was. It's in the relationship. And that is what McManus is saying is the genius of Jesus, how by his very presence, his action, and his words, he can bring healing into people's lives. Ça va? Okay? Here we go.
Excuse me. Do you understand the, can you hear the thing very well?
With that, no.
The movie? No.
In the Roman world in which Jesus was born, power was often understood to be domination, ruthless domination, power of the sword, destroy your enemy, and oppress people. That's what it meant to have power. And there are those who would say, much has not changed since the Roman world, in terms of how the world sees power. They, I'm sure, his followers, were very justified in expecting him to do exactly what Rome did to them, to overthrow and to destroy their enemies. In fact, one of the things that both the Gospels and the Chosen do very well is demonstrate how these 12 men had absolutely no idea who he truly was. And his understanding of power is going to be so radically different than theirs. They grew up, these 12 men, fed upon the Old Testament images of God the warrior. You remember stories such as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the stories of the flood, the stories of David annihilating his enemies. This image of God predominates. It's not the only one. Predominates in the mindset of the Jews of the first century. But what Jesus does, as you saw in that film, is that he reframes power not in terms of domination, but in terms of servanthood. He has a unique view because he believes that privilege does not come with power, but rather with power comes responsibility. Are you with me? Privilege does not come with power, which was the way of thinking in the Roman world, but as he taught it, responsibility brings great power. Great power brings great responsibility. For most of us, the need for power has to do with having personal freedom and autonomy. But as McManus points out, Jesus was not born into a free world. Now, Rabbi, our dear friend across the street, Rabbi and I would often talk about this. If there is the goodness of God, why the Holocaust? We had many discussions on that. This past summer, I read an interesting book that I would highly recommend to you. So if you've got a pencil ready or a pen, her name is Ellen Marie Wiseman. She wrote a book many years ago called The Plum Tree. Ellen Marie Wiseman, The Plum Tree. Now, those of you who read the book, All the Light We Cannot See, she takes that same theme. It's a German girl and a Jewish boy. And it takes you through those horrific years from the inside of a German young girl. And she is struggling all throughout this book with the following statement. As she is in Dachau at the time. But good can still stand up against evil. And maybe the best place to do that is here. You know, you may, as McManus points out, you may be powerless to change your circumstances, but you have always the power to change your attitude. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to teach the 12, as well as those who listen to him, about keeping your power. And so I have a few questions for you before I move on. How do you think the Roman concept of power is still prevalent today? And if you would, be so kind as to simply have to raise your hand and speak the answer. How is the Roman image of power in crushing one's enemy prevalent today? Now, I promised Father Dolan that this would not become a political discussion. But I'm kind of edging around it. Actually, I'm not. He is. How is the power of Rome very attractive even today? George?
I think if you look at countries like China and Russia,
Right.
and other dictatorships around the world, that seems to be the model that they're following. Through power, they're going to achieve what they want, and they're not going to let anybody or anything stand in their way. And they're willing to use all the force necessary to do that.
Okay, I think that's a pretty valid interpretation. Others? Please. Henry?
Romans also wielded their power through taxes and money,
Yeah,
and we do that very much in society.
we do. No doubt about that. Chris?
The Romans were very good at manipulating people through fear as well.
Right.
And I think a lot of the tactics, let's say, people use in our country today are to scare people.
Fear-based.
Fear-based.
You're right about that. You're absolutely right about that. Monseigneur?
Nuclear weapons.
Absolutely right. How many deaths by gun have happened in the city of Hartford thus far?
This year, 20.
The last count I heard was 18. It seems as though we no longer talk, we, generally speaking, no longer talk, but rather we shoot. And so the words of Jesus are more important today, I think, or as important today as they were back in his day. When you think of it, when the images of God as being a warrior or a redeemer, I hope that you and I can say that what redeemer is what we're looking at. Now, the epitome of Jesus' teaching on nonviolent power is to be found in the Sermon on the Mount, as you will know. And one of the things that I have learned from reading McManus's interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount is, do not let yourself become like your enemies. Do not let yourself become like your enemies. You will recall statements as, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I reject that. Do not become like your oppressors. Do not regress to their level. Hatred makes us like our enemy. These are all the things he's implying and he's speaking. Hatred makes us like our enemies. McManus wrote this statement: if the only thing that separates us from our persecutors is that we are powerless, we become like them. We often become the very thing that we hate. I think of the alcoholic who becomes an alcoholic growing up in an alcoholic environment. I'm thinking of a woman who grows up in an abusive relationship and ends up marrying an abuser. It is so true that we ought to become like the very things that we hate. And what Jesus is trying to tell these people through the Sermon on the Mount is, if you truly want to be free of your Roman oppressors, you must not be like them. If you truly want to be free of your Roman oppressors, you cannot become like them. And I ask you this question. If someone should never have had power over you in your past, why would you allow them to have power over you in your future? Jesus presents us with a new way of understanding power. Now, if you would look at those quotes that I handed out to you, I'd like to go over the first one. And it's to be found on page 85. Listen to this now. Jesus did not come to deliver us from empires or tyrants. He came to free us from ourselves. That freedom would not be achieved through brute force or the power to rule. It could only be won through the power of humility, service, and sacrifice. Jesus did not replace power with weakness. He showed us a different kind of power altogether. He reframed power as servanthood. What do you think of that remark? The real power can only be expressed through humility and service and sacrifice. He goes on to write, when we read the Bible, we have a way of superimposing over our assumptions of freedom on the text. We read the scriptures as if the Israelites were like us, living in a democracy free of tyranny. We read the story of Jesus as if he were born free. He was not. He was born into captivity. He was born into oppression. He was born into slavery. Just because your masters and oppressors allow you a measure of freedom or leeway, it does not change the reality. Jesus was not born in a free world. Do you agree or disagree? It wasn't then. He was not born into a free world. It's important that you understand that, because then you're going to see how radically different his ideas are, because they didn't come from where he was living. That's for sure. Okay? One of the scenes, that's a couple of things here. Any of you been to Israel besides myself? I think a few of you have been. Right? Yes, you've been. Well, and I know I spoke to you about this from the altar many years ago. One of the most powerful scenes was, for me, was to go to where he was beaten. And I think I told you that he was, spread eagle, and that they beat him with these whips that had cuts on the edge of them. But this I never knew. I never knew this. Our guide demonstrated to us, he said, come with me. And he brought us to a cellar-like aperture, an opening, and they would take the bodies and throw them into that pit. But with Jesus, they put him on ropes so they could bring him back out of that pit. In the movie of The Chosen, it shows him going to Jerusalem for the first time as a young man. And of course, what does he see on the road to Jerusalem? Crucifixion. It's a very hard scene to watch. And he's stunned by it. And I do believe that when he saw that, he was coming into an understanding that his understanding of power was going to cost that. Because he firmly believed that real power is all about how we serve one another, how we empower one another. As he stood and saw power, it was never power over people.
It was power with people. Quote number 3. What Jesus proposed and said was not a passive resistance. It's important you and I know that. And certainly not cowardly acquiescence. He offered them a new way to see power and freedom, a way to keep their power and freedom while still living above the standards set by human beings who only know how to abuse and steal. What do you think of that remark? The last sentence there. A way to keep both their power and their freedom while still living above the standards set by human beings who only know how to abuse and steal. I think Ellen Marie Wiseman was picking up on that idea. Because as she is going through the horrors of Dachau, she makes that same decision, not to become like them. People who know only how to abuse and to steal. He, Jesus, is coming from a similar environment, certainly not the Holocaust, but an environment of oppression. And he saw what their idea of power was, and he rejected it absolutely and completely. Before I conclude in a few minutes, any comments so far? Are you getting a sense of the radical nature of how Jesus understands power?
I just wanted to mention earlier today, meditating on one of the rosary mysteries, the luminous mysteries. Christ did the last supper, how he establishes the priesthood, washing their feet, and how he calls them to do that for one another, so to love one another as he has loved them. And it just reminded me of what you were saying of that meditation I had on that mystery.
So picking up on what you just said, do you find his words about power to be attractive?
Jesus?
Yeah.
Yes.
Only 2 people. And he is kind of saying, well, I don't know. I mean, explain to me your reaction. It's a very important reaction. Go ahead.
It's hard
Yes.
to decide that your power will be in serving others and not in recognition
Exactly.
or anything else.
Exactly.
Serving is not always easy.
No, it's not. It is not always easy. And what he's asking for here is certainly not always easy. If I may. Careful. Be very worried. In light of what Eileen just said there about this is hard to do, especially the serving part. Do you think, 2 questions, in his day, his words were unrealistic, and they are unrealistic today?
No. Gandhi.
Talk to me, girlfriend.
Gandhi.
What do you mean?
Gandhi.
Unrealistic?
Well, Gandhi did the same nonviolent service to others model as provided by Jesus against the greatest power at the time, greatest empire at the time. So
you do think his words are realistic?
They're realistic. Doesn't make them any easier to
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Nelson Mandela. I mean, there's some
Oh, I have a lot to say about Nelson Mandela. So does McManus. A perfect example of this. Were his words unrealistic then? And do they appear to be unrealistic to you today? Mary Ann.
I don't think they're unrealistic. I think they are a challenge for us. They are asking us to stretch, to reach for a higher goal, to create what Jesus was throughout the world.
Yes, a challenge. Did you hear her response? Yes, it's a challenge. It may not be realistic. Oh, that's not exactly what you said. They're realistic in the sense that they are a challenge, stressing us not to become like what we see around us in terms of the abuse of power. Teresa.
Several years ago, I came upon a TED Talk called How to Find Your Life Purpose in 5 Minutes.
How to find your life purpose in 5 minutes.
I suggest it. It's 5 minutes well spent, and it really has to do with, this talking, what we're talking about, Father. The way of doing that is saying your name, answering what do you do, which is the hardest part. You do a lot of things, but what do you really do? Who do you do it for?
Good point.
What do they want or need? And how is their life changed for the better? If you stream that one, it takes time to really think that through. Your name, what you do, who you do it for, what they want or need, and how their life is changed for the better. That is serving others. And that is your purpose.
And you see that as realistic?
I see that as necessary.
Oh, so we've gone from this is very difficult to do to, yes, there was a challenge given out here, and now you've come out with the phrase, this is necessary?
Yes.
This type of power is necessary? You're a historian. You tell me.
So, okay. I think the perspective I would put on this is just going back to the first quote in the first sentence of that Jesus did not come to deliver us from an empire of tyrants. He came to free us from ourselves.
Yes.
The Roman Empire was still around for over 400 years after.
That's right.
Gandhi freed them from the British, but India and Pakistan both moved throughout instead of fighting.
I think that's right.
So it's not going to end that, but it's going to free ourselves.
Okay, so now from this challenge to it's very difficult to do this, a challenge to stretch us, it's necessary, and you said it's really about us freeing ourselves from ourselves. Well, what does this have to do with world peace and being provided?
I was going to say, Jesus requires us to change our mindset.
Exactly. He requires us to change our mindset. We probably can do nothing about Pakistan and India, but we can do a lot about what happens in our homes and in our backyard.
This isn't really it is difficult, but it's also the most joyous part about being a Christian.
Yes. And you
when you can have, when you can do some stuff.
That's right. The greatest sign of his, how he saw power, you remember, the night before he died, he put on a towel, he knelt down, and he washed. How, in the name of God, do you call that power? Being facetious. I also cannot spell the word.
Hiding from the Roman Empire, and ended up in Rome, persecuted, and had to go back and day. So there's the cold. There certainly was cold from that time period, which you described as very difficult one, to where the news really flourished. And now it seems to be somewhat on the downside, but when people ask me about faith and religion, well, that's a pretty good track record, I think.
Both Gene, Bishop Bolton Gene has a great saying. All of a sudden, the chosen people have become the frozen. Where is or how is the radical difference in the way we live today reflected back to the few of the first century? It's a good question. Now, I know it has to end very shortly. I want to go to his remark, McManus's remark about Nelson Mandela, because I think it was very perfect. Did you know that he was in prison for 13 years? Did you know that? Did you know that he was forced to sleep naked on a cement floor for 13 years? Did you know that he had no pajamas to sleep in, depriving him of his basic dignity? Because that was a luxury only saved for whites. Did you know that he had no bed and no plumbing? Did you know? 13 years. Did you know that he was allowed to write or receive a letter only twice a year? And did you know that in once a year he could only have one visitor for 30 minutes? And McManus points to him as a man who lived out remarkably the choice to be free. If you look at that sheet of paper in front of you, I'm on quote number 4, and I'll read it very slowly because it really applies to what we've just been talking about. Nelson Mandela chose to use his power not to enact revenge. And as you said, I mean, that's not easy. Against his white oppressors, but to bring his nation together. He chose the power of forgiveness over the chains of hate and revenge. That's how it's necessary, please. His life and work have elevated the cause of racial equality and justice across the entire world, which is what you said, Claire. I have great confidence that this is exactly what Jesus was talking about when he described turning the other cheek, giving your coat as well when they take your shirt, or walking a second mile. Never allow anyone else's actions to lead you to be less. The use of power reveals who you are, and your response to power will reveal who you are. Whatever power you may feel your oppressors have over you, they are powerless when it comes to your character. And only you can choose who you are and who you will become. You can step into a freedom they are incapable of understanding, and stand in your power in such a way that they are powerless to stop you. There may be nothing more confounding to an oppressor than knowing that those they enslave have a freedom they cannot ever take away. That's not easy, but that's true. In conclusion, and I wish I had more time, and maybe we'll do this again, because I really recommend that you read this book. It's called The Genius of Jesus. His name is Erwin Raphael McManus. And this is what he writes on page 110, and I think it's a fitting way to end this brief discussion. Jesus turned the whole world upside down when it came to power. He was a genius that eluded all the intellects of his time. How could they have known that power would never know its full force until it was used on behalf of others? How could they have understood that it is not beneath God to serve? That is exactly like God to serve. If we ever want to know the power of God, we must fully embrace the heart of God. Listen to that. God is the greatest servant who ever lived.
There are no feet too dirty for God to wash. There is no life too broken for God to heal. No soul too dark for God to forgive. Who does this with their power? Who would ever see this as an act of power? Who else but Jesus would make this choice? That is what power looks like in the hands of God. That is what the power looks like in the hands of Jesus. Good to see you.
I think I speak for everyone here in that we adore Father Moran's sincerity of heart when you speak. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. Next Thursday is my night, and it will be at the upper campus. It will be a lighthearted group singing class. So if you've been told, like George Coppola has, to never open your mouth and sing ever again, that's the place to be. So we'll talk about how to get those low notes and those high notes, and we'll have some demonstrations from a couple of my singers. It should be really fun. The following week, August 3rd, is blank, so there will be nothing that week. And then there will be more details in the bulletins and e-blasts, etc., with all the details. And we invite you to the back to join us with some ice cream and fellowship. Thank you.